We are, here's Joe. We're going to begin. Welcome, everyone. If you want to cool off, there's some cold Diet Coke. If you want, it's absurdly, ridiculously cold in here as usual. But okay, I was echoing. Okay, so for anyone who came in, there are extra text sheets, and Janice has them in the back. We're going to do something that I've wanted to do for a while, which is, well, you know what, I'll wait for everybody. Cookies are hard to... You know, if you're watching at home, we're delighted that you're here, but you're missing a real spread. I mean, we have fruit and cookies, but you also, if you're not here, you don't have to worry about the hypothermia that we're concerned with, because it's about 12 degrees in here. There's taluses in the back if anyone wants to. So, okay. This is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. Janice, could you close? Something I wanted to do for a long time, especially since the war started, mainly as a reaction to the ways that a lot of Jews viewed the war in Israel. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of people had their own views on the war and judge Israel on the way they conduct themselves in war in ways that they don't judge other nations. Right? In other words, there would be Jews who are very concerned and very critical of Israel, but have nothing to say about Russia and Ukraine, or have nothing to say about Sudan, or have nothing. So already I'm not talking about non-Jews. I'm only talking about Jews right now. The non-Jews, we don't have to get into all the reasons why they don't like us. I mean, that's a different class. But why were Jews so critical of Israel and what Israel did during the war? And, you know, what does it mean for a Jew to adopt what you would call anti-Zionist opinions? And I could normally say, no problem, everyone's entitled to their opinion, until they said, because of my Jewish values. And that's where they lost me. Because I would ask the question, which Jewish value are you referring to? Which verse in the Torah are you referring to? Which page of the Talmud are you referring to? Where in medieval Jewish literature are you basing your arguments? And because if they were, it would be hard to justify the positions that they were taking with what Judaism says about war. And so today, what I wanted to do is to take a look and say, well, what would have happened since October 7th if, say, Moses was the prime minister of Israel? Or, say, Joshua was the head of the IDF? Or maybe if the prophet Micah was in charge of foreign policy? Or if King David was the head of the army? And so what I've just told you is, if you want a Jewish perspective, well, here's some Jewish perspectives. Moses and Micah were prophets. Joshua was a general. David was a general and a king. All of them were the Jewish people with whom we base our story, and from whom we derive our values. So if you're going to tell me I disagree with Netanyahu, now, if you can tell me, look, I disagree with Netanyahu on the type of cigars and champagne he drinks, that's up to you. That's fine. But if you're going to tell me I disagree with the siege of Rafah, Remember, all eyes on Rafah. Don't go into Rafah. The whole world's going to collapse if you go into Rafah. Then you went into Rafah and nothing happened. But don't go into Rafah because of my Jewish values. Fine. But which Jewish value is that? Where do you get that from? So I went back and said, well, what do the sources say? What are our Jewish values? Because if you read through the Tanakh, maybe not so much the Torah, but the Nach. You know what the Nach is? The Nach is the rest of the Hebrew Bible that's not the Torah, the prophets and the writings. By the writings, it's called the Ketuvim, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, those books. If you read through all of that stuff, there's a lot of war. There's a lot of King David writing Psalms while he's on the battlefield. Well, that's where we get our Jewish values. Is from our texts and our tradition. But time and again, I heard people say, I don't agree with what Israel's doing because of my Jewish values. Now, if you want to say, I derive my morality elsewhere, okay, no problem. By the way, that's what the Enlightenment was. You know the Enlightenment in Europe, which the Jews called the Haskalah? The Enlightenment was Christians for the first time saying you can derive morality from places other than religion. We can derive morality from literature, from Greek thought, from all kinds of outside sources that are not the New Testament. That's what the Enlightenment was. And then the Jews got interested in that. And the Jews got interested in that and said, well, we can derive morality as well from nature. That's Spinoza. Even Maimonides said we need to tap into Greek thought a little bit. But when they did that, they said, we're deriving morality from outside of Jewish dogma. That's fine. But when you tell me that those enlightened ideas are outside of Jewish dogma, you can't have it both ways and say, those are my Jewish values. You see the problem? But what people were doing were saying, I derive my morality from outside of the Hebrew Bible, and because of that morality that I derive from outside the Hebrew Bible, those are my Jewish values. What? By the way, Reformed Jews have a lot to answer for there as well. Because Reformed Judaism based its idea on saying we can have different opinions as well. And we can approach, which is fine. And you can do that. But I don't like so much when people say my Jewish values, when I then go and look at Jewish sources and say, but that's not what it says. In fact, it says the opposite. Okay. All right, so that's my premise. Anyone have a problem with the premise so far? Questions, comments, ideas? No? Okay. All right. So what I tried to ask myself for today is, if on October 7th, the Prime Minister of Israel was either Moses, Joshua, Micah, or King David, what would Israel have done? That's the question. Now, it's hypothetical because all of those people are dead. It's a hypothetical, right? All right. So, let me ask you a question today. Why, for the most part, do nations today, I think someone said, there hasn't been a day that there wasn't a war going on somewhere on the earth, like forever. I don't know, in a long time. At any given point, there's a war somewhere. Why do nations or tribes or whoever, why do they generally go to war? Even as far back as the Bible. There's usually only a few reasons why nations go to war. Land. Power. Resources. Natural resources. Why else? Religion. What would be an example of that? The Crusades, right? The 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the issues in Ireland, right? I mean, so you could say, I think there's a lot more to it than religion, but there's also a lot of religion. Why else? Tea, okay, taxes. Okay, so generally though, you're not going to go to war unless you have a reason and there's something to gain, or it's to protect yourself from someone else who wants to attack you because they have something to gain from attacking you. So a lot of times you'll have a preemptive war. We know they're coming to kill us because they want to steal all our gold, so we're going to attack them first so that they don't destroy us. So that's called a defensive war or a preemptive war. Like the 6-Day War was a preemptive war. They're coming to kill us, so let's stop them before they do that. Okay. Now, in the Torah, when the Jews leave Egypt and they go through the Red Sea, all of a sudden the nation of Amalek comes and attacks them. Why? What does Amalek want? The Jews don't have any land. They don't really have anything. I mean, they took stuff out of Egypt to build their tabernacle and stuff, but Amalek doesn't go to steal that. Amalek came and attacked the Jews for no reason. So, you could ask the question, anybody see Nuremberg? Okay. You see Nuremberg? But you've heard of, the trials. So when they asked, when you ask some of the Nazis, there was one scene where they asked one of the Nazis, why the hatred of the Jews? And he says, we needed something to rally around. We needed someone to be the scapegoat or, whatever. And I'm sure that there were certain Nazis who felt that by scapegoating one group, we can rally the rest of the group to our cause. And they used the Jews as a scapegoat for all of their problems. What are our problems? Well, we had this horrible stock market crisis, and we had this horrible financial crisis, and we lost World War I. But why did we lose World War I? It can't be because Germany's the greatest country in the world. How can we lose World War I? Because the Jews stabbed us in the back. Okay, so we blamed our problems on them. On the other hand, there were Nazis who simply felt Jews are evil. They are our real enemy. And they believed that they are our real enemy, which is nonsense. There were hardly any Jews in Germany. There were less than 500,000 Jews, I think, maybe a little bit more actually than 500,000 Jews in Germany, a country of 40 million people. The Jews had nothing to do with the misfortune of Germans. In fact, they were very loyal German citizens, many of whom died in World War I fighting for Germany. Well, that was Amalek. Amalek had this feeling about Israel, the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, this weak people who were just slaves for 210 years, who didn't even have land. They were going to a land, but they didn't even know if they were going to get it, and they attacked them for no reason. And so now Israel, or the Jewish people, when I say Israel at this point, I mean the people, there was no land yet, have to respond. And they respond by 2 of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. There are 2 mitzvahs of the 613 having to do with Amalek. One is, remember what Amalek did to you when you were leaving Egypt. And 2 is, blot out and destroy the people of Amalek. So listen to what the Torah tells you. If there's a nation who for no reason wants to come and destroy you, then you should blot them out. Now, was October 7th the same thing as Amalek attacking Israel when they were leaving Egypt? I think yes and no. No, in that what Hamas was trying to do was actually to take the land. To take the land of Israel and conquer the land of Israel for them, for Islam, for radical Islam. Whereas Amalek was attacking Israel, a nation that had no land. So in that way, it's different. And so if you're going to say, well, we have a right to blot out and destroy Amalek in the same way that, blot out Hamas, the IDF has a right to blot out Hamas in the same way that the Jews were commanded to blot out Amalek, it's not apples to apples. However, that's one way that it's different, but there's one way that it's the same. Hang on one second. Because when Hamas came in to conquer the land, they didn't say, okay, we're coming across the border, we're going to orderly collect the Jews and move you to another land so that we can move into your land, and let me help escort you, and let's get your paperwork in order, and you're going to leave the land and we're going to move in. That's not exactly how it went. They went and slaughtered every single person they could find. And it's so annoying. And had they not been stopped by the IDF, they would have continued to slaughter and slaughter and slaughter until they killed every single Jew. So in that way, there is a similarity between Hamas and Amalek. Okay, so I'm just pointing that out so far. Ian?
The reason the Nazis were so successful, Hitler was so successful, is that there was already an underlying anti-Semitism for it to work. I mean, Poland had it, a whole bunch of areas had this anti-Semitism. It's not a new thing. We've been fighting that ever since our beginnings and became successful.
Yeah, there's some truth there.
So otherwise, they couldn't, I don't think they could have gotten away with it.
Well,
They were cherished people. They said, why would we do that? They're the professors, they do this. That's not the way it went.
yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, because in 1929, the Nazis only got 2% of the vote. And by 1933, they got almost all of it. So you had to have the propaganda machine rolling, and you had to have the newspapers, and you had to have the boycotts, and you had to have, but you also had to have losing World War I and the financial crisis, which was devastating, right? But that's a whole other class.
Wilson was against the way that was presented to the losing side.
Right.
And he said they will never be able to accept it because you will destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
And that, on top of everything else, was like this perfect storm.
Yeah.
They never recovered. And so they put the blame on.
Yeah, I could live with that. I could live with that. Okay, so there's a rabbi in the Middle Ages named Rabbeinu Bachia, a Spanish rabbi. And here's what he wrote about Amalek. Okay, now he's commenting on chapter 17, verse 16 of Exodus. So since we're about to study some Torah, it's appropriate to say the blessing. Okay? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. So here's what it says. According to the plain meaning of the text of the verse, has God saying as an assurance to any future king of Israel that he's to fight a war on God's behalf against Amalek. This war would be distinguished by the fact that any loot collected in such a war was out of bounds to any Israelite and would be exclusively God's property. That is why Saul, king of Israel, was punished for allowing the people to retain part of the loot from the campaign against Amalek. This stain on the character of the Israelites, Saul and his descendants, continued until the time of Mordecai, when the Jews took their revenge on their enemies without touching any part of the loot. Okay, so you see here a couple of different things. One is, you are allowed to take revenge on your enemies. If your enemies come to destroy you, you're allowed to rise up and destroy them first. And what happens at the end of the book of Esther? At the end of the book of Esther, the Jews go out and they find all of the people who were going to kill them. And they attack and kill them. And it ends up being about 75,000 people. So they find all the people in all the land that were waiting by the gallows, that were, wearing the Nazi hats and whatever they were wearing, and everyone who was organized for the systematic destruction of the Jewish people, and they wiped them out. But what they didn't do was steal their property. And everyone else did. By the way, part of the story of the Holocaust is the despoilation, it's a hard word, but the despoilation of the Jewish people. Not only did the Nazis kill all the Jews, but they took all their stuff. Even before they started killing them, the first thing they attacked was their ability to make a living. And they would walk into their homes and just take everything. And they inventoried it. They kept track of it. You ever see Woman in Gold? They went and they took everything. We're still looking for some of that stuff. Everybody did that back then. That was part of war. There was only one nation who would, if they conquered you, wouldn't also take your stuff. The Jews. Which means that the precursor to the Geneva Convention, the idea of ethical battle was invented by the Tanakh. There was no such thing as not taking the spoils until God said Jews don't do that. Which means to say, we know that occasionally you're going to have to go to war, but when you go to war, you're going to have to do it in a moral way, and there are rules. Within those rules, one of the rules is that if people come to systematically destroy the Jewish people, you can go and root them out and destroy them. So, if yes. Okay, now here's the problem with Amalek. The question is, did that apply to Amalek? So yes, you're not allowed to take the spoils. Now, what's the main problem with taking the spoils of non-Jews? There's the possibility that anything that they owned could have been used in the process of idolatry. Now, what's wrong with, so what? So let's say I conquer an idolater's home, and I find this big gold staff. And it looks like a staff that they used to use in their idolatry and their crazy rituals. And I say, you know what? I could probably make a 3-wood out of this. So it's a golf joke. There's a mitzvah that you're not allowed to have any benefit from anything that was ever used in idolatry. So you have to get rid of it. You have to destroy it. But why? I mean, who cares? Why would God care if I'm playing golf with something that, some Hittite used to use to dance around fires and pray to the moon? Or God knows what they... remember Benjamin Disraeli? He wasn't Israeli. He was Disraeli. So one time, he was in the British House of Commons, and they were yelling all kinds of anti-Semitic things to him. And his response was, my ancestors were worshiping in the temple of King Solomon while your ancestors were painting themselves blue and swinging from trees. I don't use that at interfaith events, but it's something to think about. Yeah, because they used to worship their animals. And so you had to slaughter their animals and get rid of all of their animals as well. Because the animals for the idolaters were part of the cult. And so you had to get rid of them. Yeah, you do see that a lot. And King Saul was punished greatly for that. Because King Saul was told to wipe out Amalek. And he did. But he spared the king and the cattle. And the king's name was Agag. And Agag was the king of Amalek. And you know who we later learned was an Agagite? Haman. And so the fact that Saul didn't wipe out Amalek when he had the chance allowed that anti-Semitism, that anti-Jewish thing to keep going in the world. But what was Saul's punishment? He lost his job. He said, Samuel, the prophet, came to him and said, you're not going to be king anymore. King David's going to be king. And of all of the kings, there were many worse kings because King Saul never stopped worshiping God. There were other kings in the Tanakh who worshipped idols, who tore up the Torah, and none of them lost their job. That wasn't as bad as sparing Amalek, because sparing Amalek kept that Jewish hatred in the world. Fortunately, we don't have to deal with it anymore. You know, obviously it's gone. You know, it's all Saul's fault. We wouldn't have had to, you know. Okay, so all I've pointed out so far is that according to Rabbeinu Bachya, who's one of the most important rabbis of the Middle Ages, that if someone comes to wipe you out, you're allowed to wipe them out. However, there are rules to war, and you have to behave according to those rules when you go out to war, and one of them is you're not allowed to steal the stuff. You got to leave it where it is or destroy it. That's all we have so far. Now, the next war that came about after Amalek attacked the Jews in the wilderness, what's the next real war? Well, the war for the land of Israel. So now we know that, now they had lots of skirmishes in the desert. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost a lot of troops, sometimes they, you know, whatever. Moses was davening. Who was the commander fighting the wars? Joshua. So now they get to the land of Israel. Moses dies. The Jews go in. And what's going to happen? War for the land of Israel. Now, this is a problem. If you want to call us colonial settlers, now the problem with calling us colonial settlers is we were already there. This land was already given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but we were kicked out by famine or whatever, and we weren't allowed to go back because the Egyptians held us as slaves. So they're really just going back home. There's just a lot more of them now. Now, if you were a Palestinian today and you wanted to make this argument, I could maybe understand what you were saying. I mean, not really, but sort of. At least it would be better than the fiction that they today call Palestinian narrative. But when Joshua comes into the land of Israel, there are already other people living there. And the land is theirs. They're called Canaanites. They're from Canaan. And God tells Joshua, kick those people out. So if you ever were going to say that the Jews stole the land, this is your time to shine. Now, I would have an argument with you, and which I'm about to give you, but this is that argument, because this is when they came in and said, you know what, you're here, we're moving you out, and we're moving in. Now, why was that possible? In Abraham's time, we're now in Exodus, but if we go back to the beginning of the Torah in Abraham's time, God tells Abraham, you can't live here yet. And there's a line that says, the Canaanite were then in the land. What does that mean? Who cares if the Canaanites are then in the land? What it means is, the Canaanites were living there, and it was their land, and it was going to be their land until they lost it. How could they lose it? By sinning. Because the land of Israel is holy and different than any other land, and if you reach your threshold of sin, the land spits you out. And God said to Abraham, you're here now. They haven't reached their threshold. Even if I wanted to kick them out, I can't. But by the time Joshua came back with the Jews, God said they deserve to be kicked out because of all of their sins. By the way, God said the same thing to the Jews. If you reach your threshold of sins, the land will spit you out too. And it did, twice. Because of the sin of idol worship, the first temple was destroyed, and we were kicked out. We went and we repented. We came back. We sinned again. We got kicked out again. That's why we're sitting here. That's why we're freezing in this room. We could be balmy weather in Tel Aviv right now. Yeah. I mean, look, if you're going to be kicked out, better to be in South Florida. Some people are, in Detroit, these godforsaken places. But at least we have beautiful South Florida. No offense. But it's probably really cold there today. I hate the cold. I'm from Pennsylvania. I just cannot bear it anymore. So God, it's not the idea that there were these innocent people there and the Jews came in and kicked them out. At least from our biblical perspective, their sins had reached the point where they deserved to be kicked out. And if they didn't, why didn't God just have Abraham kick them out? Or, just God take them and move them. I mean, lots of other ways this could have been done. This is how it works. Now, how does Joshua do it, though? How does he get rid of these people? Okay. How do you move people who... Listen closely, because this is going to come in very handy when we start talking about 1947, 1948. How do you move people out of a land who deserve to be moved out of that land? You hear the question? How do you move people out of a land who deserve to be moved out of that land? Okay, so Maimonides tells us, okay? He's summarizing the Talmud here, but if you look at the very bottom of the page, we're going to skip one source skip Micah for now. You see where it says Rambam is Maimonides. It's also our day school. Here's what Joshua did. When Joshua came to Israel, and he saw these other Canaanite nations there, he sent 3 letters to the Canaanites before entering the promised land. The first he sent them was this: whoever desires to flee should flee. Meaning Joshua wrote a letter to the people who were living there saying, God told us this is our land. We don't want to fight. I suggest you just leave. Turkey's beautiful. Libya's beautiful. Looks like it has a good future. Right? He should have put up a sign that said, go to any other nation or in the neighborhood. You will never have to work again. You'll have all the oil in the world. You'll love it. Okay, forget that joke. Just make a note. Next time I teach this class, don't use that one. Okay. So they didn't leave on their own. Afterwards, he sent a second message. Whoever desires to accept a peaceful settlement should make peace. Meaning, if you want to stay here with us, you can. On 7 conditions. On 7 conditions. You don't have to be Jewish. You do whatever you want. But you've got to follow the 7 laws of Noah, which are like a watered-down 10 commandments. No murdering, no stealing, no adultery, no eating from live animals, but no idolatry. And that was a lot to ask for idolaters. Okay, so they could have stayed and been totally left alone, full citizens. Not slaves, not full citizens. All they had to do was accept a watered-down version of the 10 Commandments. That's it. Okay. And they said no. So then he sent a third letter that said, we're coming. If you're still there, it's going to be a war. So if you're talking about, if Joshua was dealing with the Palestinians, the first letter would say, listen, you guys go to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We'll stay over here. Everything will be fine. They said no. Kept attacking. So Joshua would then say, all right, no problem. You can even come live with us. You just have to put down your weapons and stop trying to kill us. That would have been letter 2. It's not so much to ask. The third letter is, if you keep trying to kill us, we're going to fight back. That's a Jewish value. It's a Jewish value. Okay. Now, I don't think anyone ever said to Joshua, listen, this siege that you have planned, how are you going to create a humanitarian tunnel to get the aid into our enemies? so that we can take care of them, so that this war goes on forever and we never actually win. What are the other nations going to say? You know, where's... I don't see that here. You know, I don't see that here. I see, you offer peace. They didn't want it. You offer, you live over here and we'll live over here. They didn't want it. They come to kill you. You try not to let them. And sometimes you have to kill them to make it happen. That might have been, you could say I'm crazy. But given that this is what happened when Joshua was in a similar situation, I say Joshua, if he was prime minister of Israel, that might be a Jewish value he would consider. Okay, now, let's fast forward from Joshua to about, so, you know, King David, just to give you a timeline, it's very difficult for scholars to date Moses or the Exodus. And there's a lot of debate. So let's say from the dates that they try, somewhere from 1,300 years before zero to 1,600 years before zero. Probably closer to 1,600 years before zero. What we do know is, and what we can date, is King David. I mean, they found everything. They found King David's wallet. They found his ID card. I mean, they have got everything from King David. They have his, you can go to the city of David and see his palace. It's unreal. I've been there many times. So we can date King David, and King David is 1000 BCE, which means that Joshua is about 250, probably to 300 years before that. So probably, let's say Joshua's coming in 1,300 years before zero to conquer Canaan, and then King David is 1000 BCE. And if King David, King David ruled from 1000 BCE to 960, 40 years, which means that his son, King Solomon, who then also ruled 40 years, ruled from 960 to 920, which means that the first temple was built between 960 and 920 BCE. With me so far? That first temple stood until 586 BCE when the Babylonians destroyed it. However, right after Solomon died, the Israeli kingdom split into two. The north was called Israel, and the south was called Judea. Jerusalem was in the south. The north was conquered in 723 by the Assyrians. And the 10 tribes that were there became the 10 lost tribes, and they were gone. And so now all there was the south, called Judah. And all the Jews in the world at that time lived there. And that's when they started to be called Judeans. And that's why today we're called Jews. Just like Chinese are from China, Jews are people who are from Judea. Right? What's Judea today? The West Bank. But we were never there. Even though it's called Judea. Okay. And Samaria. Don't forget Samaria. But Samaria also has a nice name in Hebrew, Shomron, which sounds pretty Jewish. Shomer, Shomron. Okay. So, in 723, the Assyrians come and conquer the northern kingdom, and they're coming to conquer the southern kingdom too. And so Israel is again at war. And Micah sees that the northern tribes have been kicked out of the land of Israel. And look what he said. So this is Rabbi Steinsaltz, a 20th century very famous rabbi. His commentary on Micah 4:13. So this is the second source on the sheet. You see where it says, therefore? So look what he says, Rabbi Steinsaltz. The bold part is what Micah says. The not bold part is just Steinsaltz adding some commentary to help us understand what it means. So it says, therefore, arise and thresh your enemies, daughter of Zion. For I will make your goring horn iron, and I will make your hooves bronze. You will crush many peoples. I will seize their gains for the Lord and their riches. Their property and strength will be taken for the Lord of the entire earth. They are coming to besiege Jerusalem, but they will suffer their greatest downfall there. So what Micah's talking about here is that the 10 tribes of the north have just been kicked out of Israel. The Assyrians are on their way to come and conquer the south too. By the way, the Israelite king made a deal with the Assyrians to be their vassal so that they wouldn't destroy Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, wouldn't destroy the southern kingdom. And at that point, Judea became a vassal to Assyria. But what Micah is saying is, Jews are being kicked out of Israel. And it's a Jewish value, according to Micah. You know, Micah also has that famous quote, Micah, what is it that God wants from you? Only to walk humbly, love justice, and do good deeds all the days of your life.
Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God.
Right. Which is wonderful because really far liberal Jews love this verse from Micah, and they quote Micah all the time. Love mercy and justice and walk humbly before your God. Micah also says if anyone ever kicks you out of the land of Israel, go back there and kill them and take your land back. That part they're not as big on. But that's what Micah says. We just saw it. You just got kicked out of Israel, your homeland, but someday you're going to come back and defeat your enemies, and their greatest downfall is going to be in Jerusalem, and you're going to take back and build Jerusalem again. Now, here's another argument. And again, this is one Palestinian. If I were a Palestinian, this would be the one argument that I would make that might resonate a little bit. You Jews left when you were kicked out by the Romans in 70 CE. That's 2,000 years ago. You've been gone a long time. Maybe this was your land, but you've been gone 2,000 years. Give it a rest. You have Boca. It's not like, go give it up. Now, there is some sense to that. Now, we have a great answer. We have a theological answer, and we have a military answer, and we have a sociological answer, and they're all very good, and I can give you all of them. But from their perspective, you could at least see where they're coming from. I'm not talking about Palestinians. I'm talking about Jews and their Jewish values. So for a Jew to tell me, we were gone for 2,000 years. It's now their land. I'm anti-Zionist. It's not my Jewish values that we should be able to go back. No problem. Just tell me. Was Micah wrong? Do you know better Jewish values than the prophet Micah? Where does your Jewish values come from? Because mine come from God, if you believe in that kind of thing. Because Micah was a prophet. And so they'll tell you, who cares what Micah said? Just remember to walk humbly, do justice, I like them when I like them, but I don't when I don't. Okay. But Jewish values says, we were gone for 2,000 years, but the whole time we were thinking about Israel. Why do you think we've been breaking glasses at weddings all these times? Why do you think we've been saying L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim at the end of every Seder? We've been yearning to go back for 2,000 years. That's the Jewish value. And if you take the Zionism out of the Jewish value, you miss a lot of the Judaism. Okay. So I'm not telling you what I think. I'm just telling you what Micah would have said in the same conversation. Okay. Now, this is really a whole college course. I'm trying to do all this in a little. We have these two mitzvahs. Remember what Amalek did for you. Remember what Amalek did to you and blot out Amalek. 2 of the 613 mitzvahs. Can we say that the thing that probably most resembles Amalek today in this world is Hamas? And if so, then it's written in our Torah that we're commanded to wipe out Hamas. Can you make that argument? And the answer is probably not. Probably not. Why? because of the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? So if you look at the back of the page, there's a Mishnah called Yadayim, chapter 4, section 4, which says Sancharev, who was in English Sennacherib, or Sennacherib, who was the king of Assyria who destroyed the northern kingdom in 723 BCE, came and mixed up all of the nations. Okay? This is why the 10 tribes became the 10 lost tribes. Because Stalin did the same thing, by the way. Stalin tried to get people to not be loyal to anything, and he took people and mixed them up and put them all over the place so that nobody was loyal to anybody. Sennacherib took the 10 tribes and mixed them all up to get them to assimilate into Assyrian culture, and that's when the 10 lost tribes became the 10 lost tribes, and we lost them. But Amalek was also conquered in the north. And Sennacherib, so look what Maimonides says. There's Maimonides right below that. Laws of Kings and Wars 5:4. It's a positive commandment to annihilate the 7 nations who dwelled in the land of Israel, because it says in Deuteronomy 20:17, you shall utterly destroy them. So I might think that if Hamas is Amalek, I should utterly destroy them. Anyone who chances upon one of them and does not kill him violates a negative commandment, meaning if you run into someone and he's from Amalek, you need to go and kill him. However, Maimonides says, the memory of them has already been obliterated, so do me a favor and please don't kill anybody. Why has the memory already been obliterated? Because Sennacherib mixed the people up, and there's no way anymore to know if someone's from Amalek or not. Just like there's no way to know if someone originally came from the tribe of Naphtali, or Asher, or Zevulun. They're gone. They're gone. Now, is the seed of Amalek still in this world? Yes, because it was never destroyed. But is it possible for us to figure out who they are, according to Maimonides and according to the Mishnah? No. There's no way to tell who they are. Hamas resembles them. Hezbollah resembles them. The Ayatollah of rock and roll, Khomeini, resembles them. But can you say for sure that they're Amalek and you should kill them? No. There's no way to know. Okay. Now, one other argument, I'll end with this one, even though there are a million more. But this one I think is the most interesting. I'd say what I think is the best for last. Is there anything fair that Arabs can say today, especially the ones who are refugees, who are Palestinian refugees? Is there anything fair to say that they were, in 1948, during the War of Independence, were forcibly removed from their homes and kicked out, and their land was stolen? Are there any Arabs who can say that? And the answer is yes. There are instances that happened. Now, not for the majority. The majority of the Palestinians who were kicked out is the difference today between Palestinians and Israeli Arabs. Israeli Arabs are full citizens of the state. There's 2 million of them. They have all the rights. They're doctors, they're lawyers. They live, they can do whatever they want in Israel, go wherever they want. They're full Israeli citizens, and they don't even have to serve in the army. And pretty much all of them don't. But they're full citizens. So what's the difference between those Israeli Arabs and the Palestinians who are not Israeli Arabs? In 1948, when the war happened, there was first a partition plan. The partition plan was that Israel would be created and given basically the coastline and some land in the south and a little bit of some villages in the north, and Israel would be this tiny little entity. And the Jews, 3 years after the Holocaust, said, what other choice do we have? Of course, we'll take it. And the Arabs, who got the majority of the land, said, we won't take it because we don't want any Jews here, period, even in the places that were never cities, like Tel Aviv, Herzliya. What non-Jew lived in Herzliya? They invented Herzliya as a Jewish town. Same thing with Netanya, right? Kfar Saba, Petach Tikva. These are places there was nothing there except swamp. It's not like these were these bustling Palestinian towns. There was literally nothing there but swamp. The Jews came, drained the swamps, built their cities. But the Palestinians said, or the Arabs, they weren't Palestinians yet, the Arabs said, you can't even have that. We don't want you here at all. And didn't accept the partition, declared war. When they declared war, all the other Arab nations came in to attack, and a lot of those Arabs left because the Arab armies told them, leave now, and when we win, you'll come back. But you don't want to be in our way when we're fighting. And also, one of the main things that was going on during the War of Independence, the Arabs were certain they were going to win. What they weren't certain of was which country was going to get what. So the Egyptians said to all the Arabs who were living, in the southern area, leave, because we're going to come in, and that's going to be Egypt. And the Syrians said to the ones in the north, leave, because we're going to take that and call it Syria, and Jordan, and so forth. So these people left, and then something happened that they didn't see coming. The Jews actually won the war, and they couldn't go back. Now, lots of Arabs said, we're not going anywhere. This is our home. We're staying right here. Whether it's run by Jews, whether it's run by Arabs, we live here. Those today are Israeli Arabs who have full rights in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. Okay. Now, were there some villages that... So that's the overwhelming majority of what happened. But there were villages, Arab villages, where the IDF, or the Haganah, or the Palmach, wasn't called the IDF yet. The Haganah or the Palmach went into these Arab villages, told the Arabs that were there, you have to leave. Why? Because there was an Arab army coming in that direction to attack Israel. And the Jews were worried that the people in that village would help the Arab army to destroy them. So in order to protect themselves and not aid the enemy, they moved them out. And that was called Plan Daled. And that happened. And some of those people who were moved out never got their houses back. Okay, now, the last question I want to ask is, if Joshua was prime minister in 1948, what would he have done in such a situation? And this is truly incredible to me. So this is what I wanted to say for last. I'm just amazed by this. So you see what it says Rashi on Joshua 8:13? Okay, it says, that night, Joshua walked through the valley. So this is right before the Jews are going in to conquer, or the Israelites are going in to conquer the land of Israel. Joshua goes for a walk in the valley. And look what Rashi says happened. What was Joshua doing? Like, who cares if he went for a walk in the valley? The Bible wouldn't tell us that unless it was trying to convey something. Because otherwise, who cares? So Rashi says, here's what the rabbis thought. Our sages have said that he lodged in the depth of the law. Wow. The same word in Hebrew for valley, or the same root of the word for valley, is depth. There's a word in Hebrew called amok. Amok means deep or depth. But emek is a valley. And so when it said Joshua went walking through the valley, walking is holech. He was going. So he was going through the valley. But a different way to say that is, he was studying the halakha in depth. You see that? Is that the most incredible thing you've ever heard? What was Joshua doing before he went to war to conquer the land of Israel? He was studying in depth the laws of war. Is that incredible? He was studying in depth the laws of war, because when Jews go to war, there is a very specific moral code that you have to follow. And so if you ask me, are there Jewish values when it comes to war? I'll say, yeah, they're about 3,000 years old. Hey, one second. Okay, go ahead, actually.
So today's IDF, do they refer to it as rabbis who, do they ask,
Yes. So, actually, she said in Israel, does the army consult with rabbinic viewpoints? And the answer is yes. There's a chief rabbi of the IDF, and a couple trips ago to Israel, I was with a group that went to meet with him. And it was truly fascinating. And there's all kinds of rules. Can you have non-kosher food in a tank? Yeah, I mean, all these different things they have to consider. How to wear tzitzit in a uniform that's when the tzitzit, the uniform has to be a certain amount of material, but we need tzitzit. And there's all these different kinds of laws that they're constantly dealing with. Now, does Bibi call the chief rabbi of Israel every time he wants to bomb a terrorist? Probably not. But they have protocols, and they do take into account Jewish law. But let me just go. So, I've never been in the room where they made these decisions. Shockingly. So I don't know exactly. I'll try to find out more information, though, because it's a very interesting question. But there is this chief rabbinate of the IDF, which is a very serious thing, fascinating thing. So I just want to conclude with this. Our sages have said he lodged in the depth of law. Our sages interpreted the word emek as an expression of depth, and they say he spent the night studying Torah. After all the preparations were made and orders given, Yehoshua had time to return to the study of Torah, which is the real protection in times of crisis. He remembered the rebuke of the angel the night before the fall of Jericho. And then just Rashi there, he says, at the time of day, they had astrologically predicted previously, saying, at the time we will go out, for they were sorcerers and diviners, which meant that the non-Jews, what Joshua did was he studied what the idolaters were doing. And he was looking at their movements to try to figure out what would be the best strategy to go and attack them. Well, if you read here Plan Dalet, I just brought you Benny Morris, who's a very left-wing Israeli historian. But this is what he wrote to describe Plan Dalet. You can read it on your own. But Plan Dalet was basically saying, yes, there are going to be times where we need to move out the Arabs from these villages, or else we may not win this war. And that was a strategic decision. So my point is that Joshua looked deeply into Jewish law to figure out how to go to fight the war. And then he went and studied strategically, what are these people doing? Where are they going? How are we then going to win the war? And that's pretty much the same thing the IDF did in 1948. So if you ask me, how do you deal with these Arabs who were forcibly removed from their villages during the War of 1948? I said, well, you wouldn't have that problem if the Arabs would have accepted the first letter of Joshua. You wouldn't have that problem if they would have accepted peace. Secondly, you wouldn't have that problem if they would have accepted the second letter of Joshua. The second letter said, you just live here and we'll just live here and we'll all get along just fine. But that wasn't good enough either. And they wouldn't have that problem if you would have accepted the third letter of Joshua, which said, if you don't attack us, we're not going to attack you. But if you do attack us, we are going to attack you. And if you take sides with our enemies, then you may lose your home. That's what Joshua, I think, would have told those Arab villagers. So it's a shame that some Arab villagers lost their home, but it's a bigger shame that the Arabs in general weren't willing to accept the IDF's letter or David Ben-Gurion's first letter or second letter. Why don't we all just live in peace and you live over there and we'll live over here and we'll call it a day? Had you accepted that, nobody lost their home. But if you do attack us and we do have to go to war, then what Joshua did was he went into the Torah and he studied, okay, we have to go to war. How do we go to war? And you know what the Torah told Joshua? Try to win. Try to win the war, which means try to have a better strategy than your enemies. And part of Plan Dalet's strategy was, if we're going to win this war, we're going to need to move them out. Not because we want to be mean or rude or cruel or deal with them for the next 1,000 years in their complaints, but because we want to win this war. And if we don't win this war, the opposite of winning this war is another Holocaust, which is what Hamas tried to do on October 7th.
So in 1948, after they have to declare themselves that they are,
I don't think so. I mean, well, nobody really came back. You either stayed or you left. But if you stayed, that was enough for the state of Israel to say, we're not kicking you out. We're not kicking anybody out. But in the middle of war, we're not going to help our enemies beat us. So what I tried to do today was to say, well, there were Jewish leaders in the Tanakh that had to deal with some of the same issues that we're dealing with today. And here's how they went about doing it, based on what I would consider Jewish values, which somehow seem to be a lot different than people who criticize IDF because of their Jewish values. So that's my premise, and it was more just a hypothetical fun thing to do, but I hope it was helpful for you, and thank you. Happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this answers the question, but the IDF does have a code of conduct that I think is built on the values, and there are 4 fundamental values, one of which is human dignity, and 10 additional values. I mean, it's on all the bases, it's posted everywhere. So
Have you ever heard anyone say that Israel is the most moral army in the world? So I've heard people say, Israel advocates, that saying that you shouldn't say that. And the fact that there's anti-Semitism baked into even having to say that. Because there are no other armies that you just assume they're immoral. But having to say that means that the person you're saying it to assumes that Israel is an immoral army. And so you shouldn't even have to say that. It should be obvious. But it's anti-Semitic just to assume that Israel's army isn't moral because they're Jews. And that's which is like an interesting, I wouldn't get caught up on that, but it's an interesting thing because no other country ever has to argue that. Everyone else goes to war, they go to war. And they try to win the war. Nobody sitting around and saying Ukraine is the most moral army. They never have to say that. You just assume they are. God knows what the Ukrainians are doing to the Russian soldiers that they capture. Not that those Russian soldiers are so wonderful either, but you think the Ukrainian armies, they're such moral people. But Israel, every second, oh, we're the most moral, we're the most moral. Why do we have to do that? Because of anti-Semitism. That's a problem, and that's a different class. So anyway, thank you so much. I hope it helped a little bit.